According to the Journal of Family Violence, every year, an estimated 3.3 to 10 million children are exposed to domestic violence in their homes. I know from my audience survey that 90% of you have not experienced any form of domestic violence. But I personally have been a part of that startling number above, and it has not only impacted my parents, but has left an lasting impression on me. Keep in mind that we are all still young, and eventually we are probably going to get married or have kids of our own. That is why I would like to talk to you today about this issue that is sweeping across the doorsteps of nearly 30 to 60% of American families, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The first problem is physical abuse. According to the impact of exposure to domestic violence on children and young people, children who are exposed to domestic violence are 15 times more likely to be physically abused or to suffer from developmental issues. Witnessing domestic violence involves more than just seeing the actual fight. It can be overhearing it or seeing the aftermath of the fight with bruises and cuts on the mother or the furniture being broken. Mothers are often depressed and do not have the physical or emotional ability to care for their children, causing the child to feel neglected and not given its appropriate needs. It also impacts the mother's inability to enforce rules upon the child when it misbehaves. It has been statistically shown by the International Journal of Child Neglect that men who are abusing their partners are also likely to physically abuse their children as well, and they also have a more stricter and controlling form of parenting. Like they'll beat their kids to get it to behave, slap, hit, and scream in the face, and also they put their personal needs in front of the child's needs. Children are put in the middle of disputes, forced to pick sides, and are told to spy on each parent. This escalates if the parents are going through a separation or a custody battle. Now let's move on to the second form of abuse, and that would be emotional abuse. Children have a very hard time controlling their emotions when they're in environments like this. Boys tend to be a little bit more aggressive and angry, and that's kind of how they communicate with people, especially if they have a problem with something. And girls tend to be withdrawn and removed. Children worry about their mother and feel their roles to protect her, and they experience guilt and they feel like it's their fault when the mother has been hurt by the father. If the parents split or if the child is taken away, that only escalates their feelings of worrisome and anxiety and depression and sadness. The third problem of domestic violence children can face is social abuse. Children in these homes normally lack social development for obvious reasons, because they're not given the attention that they need at such a young age when they soak up everything. They have poor verbal skills and social skills, and usually half the time they're either being bullied at school or they are the personal bullies, because they're used to that violence and they're used to that angry behavior towards other people. And they also have a hard time trusting other people, especially people that are trying to help them, and that carries on with them when they start to have personal relationships with partners. Researchers of the impact of exposure and domestic violence on children and young people took a sample of about 4,600 kids done in 2005 and found that boys and girls who were victims of domestic violence, they were more likely to repeat the cycle of violence in their own relationships and in their own families. So the boys were more abusive to their wives and girlfriends, and the girlfriends were more victimized and withdrawn and just in that situation of manipulation. So what can be done to help these problems be resolved? The first solution would be better law enforcement and services. Dr. Joy D. Ososky is a professor of pediatrics and psychiatry at the Louisiana State University Medical Center in New Orleans, and he explains how law enforcement has a very key role in domestic violence issues because, for one, they're the first people to actually show up to the scene and show up to the situation, and they're the ones that actually report the situation to the government so the government knows that this is happening. And there was also a study of police officers in New Orleans, which is one of the highest crimes areas of domestic violence, by the way, and showed that the majority of the police officers said that their calls are domestic calls, and they're also the most unpredictable and they're most dangerous, and of course they're involving children half the time, so that's not a good situation. Therefore, more police officers need to be hired and specifically trained for domestic calls, and all should be educated on the effects children are facing, and I think that they need to provide more services and more organizations for people in this situation so that they can get help. Not only the fact that they can get help, make them get help. The next solution is better funding. More funding needs to be placed for children and families. More funding needs to be available, and more awareness needs to be available. Because if you don't have awareness, then how are people going to know to raise money for this cause? A good example of this is breast cancer. Everyone knows that the ribbon is pink. Everyone knows that it's celebrated on February. Not everybody knows what the color is for domestic violence or the month they celebrate domestic violence month is. No one usually knows that. So if we actually got this funding, it would make way for more prevention and intervention programs to help people that are in need, and more funding would also be able to provide better research and better understanding and better solutions of this problem. And the last solution is the child should be taken away. There's two different types of taken away I believe in. If a child is being physically abused and sexually abused and they're in a high-risk situation, then I think the child should be taken away from that family as quick as possible. And I think it should be very, 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 very hard for, say, if the mother wanted the kid back, for her to get that kid back. I think she should have to go through a very long processed thing to even maybe get her kid back. But for cases that are less minor and just for families that just need help, I think that the kid should be taken away for a certain amount of time while the family gets help. And once the family gets help and is ready for the child to come back, when the child does come back, services should still check up on the family, and the family should still attend intervention sessions. Domestic violence is a growing concern involving, so in conclusion, domestic violence is a growing concern involving many American homes today. Further action and awareness needs to be taken to make sure these kids are growing in a safe environment. As someone who has grown up in a domestic violence home, I beg you to be aware and think of it this way. Would you want someone treating your child badly? No, you wouldn't. So why would you treat your own child badly? Thank you.